Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. This time we're going to be tackling a really interesting excerpt we found labeled ch2.txt.
Ooh, yeah.
It's a bit of a mystery.
A mystery.
I don't know what book it's from, but it's fascinating stuff.
I agree.
We're going to be getting into free will, neuroscience,
The brain.
all that good stuff.
All the big questions.
But whether you're into legal stuff or philosophy or you just want to kind of understand how your brain works,
All the work, yeah.
this one's for you.
Definitely.
Now, this excerpt, it starts with a scene, and it's kind of a wild one, you know? It really makes you think about how much control we actually have over our actions.
Yeah, it drops us right into the action late at night.
Oh, yeah. Describe it. Set the scene for us.
Okay, so we're at like a small airfield, one of those little hangars.
Okay.
It's late, dark, and there are these two figures. One's a police officer, and the other one is a civilian.
Okay.
Then a military man shows up.
A military man, so we got three people now.
Yeah. Three people, and tension you can cut with a knife.
Ooh, I like it.
The military guy gets a phone call.
Oh?
And it ends badly, gunshot over the phone.
Oh, wow.
And then the civilian, they shoot the military man.
Whoa, this escalated quickly.
Right. It's a lot to take in.
So much happening.
But it gets weirder.
Weirder. How so?
More police show up.
Okay.
But instead of arresting the shooter...
You'd think that's the next step.
You would, right. They just leave with the body.
What?
Yeah, they leave the civilian there with the officer.
I'm already hooked. I mean, where do we even go from here?
Right. I mean, what happened? What's going on? Who are these people?
Is the civilian going to be arrested?
It really makes you think about motivations and consequences and all that.
And that's what I love. It's like a movie.
It totally is, like a thriller.
And that's exactly what the author does. They use this scene to jump into the neuroscience of it all.
Yeah, get into the brain stuff.
Exactly. And that leads to the big question this excerpt really explores. Do our brains make decisions before we're even consciously aware of them?
Big question.
Like, are we really calling the shots, or are we just kind of along for the ride?
Yeah, is free will an illusion?
Now, the excerpt, it brings up this guy, Benjamin Libet.
Ah, Libet, classic.
I'm guessing he's got something to do with this.
Big time. He did this famous study back in 1983.
Okay, what did he do?
He had people hooked up to these brain monitors, and all they had to do was push a button.
Seems simple enough.
Right, whenever they felt like it.
Okay.
But here's the catch. They also had to report when they made the decision to push the button.
So, like, track their own conscious thought process.
Exactly.
Ever. Yeah.
So Libet, he's looking at the brain activity, and what he finds is wild.
What did he find?
There's this surge of activity.
In the brain.
Yeah, right before people even reported making the decision to push the button.
Well, wait, so the brain's getting ready to act before the person is even aware they've decided?
Exactly. It's like our brains are making decisions before we even know about it.
And he called this surge.
The readiness potential.
Readiness potential. I like it.
It's basically the brain prepping for action.
So, if our brains are already prepping for action, where does that leave our conscious choice? Are we really in control, or is it just an illusion?
It's a big question, right? Makes you wonder about all those everyday choices we make.
Like what?
Like imagine you're at the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle.
Ooh, dangerous place for me.
Right. And you're trying to decide between that sugary cereal you love and the healthier option.
The battle we all know.
Exactly. But maybe your brain has already made the choice before you've even consciously considered the healthier one.
So I'm reaching for the sugary cereal without even realizing I've made the choice.
Maybe it's like your brain's on autopilot.
That's trippy.
It is. It really challenges how we think about free will.
So what about all those times I convinced myself I was making the healthy choice?
Well, maybe your brain decided first, and you're just really good at telling yourself a story afterwards.
So I'm basically just rationalizing my brain's decisions.
Maybe.
I mean, this excerpt doesn't stop there. It talks about studies that came after Libet using all sorts of fancy technology like fMRI and even single neuron recordings.
Yeah, they call it Libet 2.0 and 3.0.
Libet 2.0 and 3.0, taking it to the next level.
And in some of those later studies, the gap between the brain activity and conscious awareness was even bigger.
How much bigger?
Up to 10 seconds in one case.
10 seconds. That's wild. Imagine your brain making up its mind about something 10 seconds before you think you've made a choice.
It really makes you question our whole idea of being the ones in control, doesn't it?
It's like our brains are playing 10 steps ahead.
And we're just trying to keep up.
It's almost like the feeling of making a choice is just an afterthought.
Like our brain is the puppet master and we're the puppet.
This is blowing my mind.
It's pretty mind-bending stuff.
So then this leads to what the excerpt calls the illusion of agency.
Yeah, the idea that our sense of control might be more of a story we tell ourselves after the fact.
Like we're just making up a narrative to explain what our brains have already decided.
In a way, yeah.
And the excerpt mentions a bunch of psychology studies that back this up, right?
Yeah.
Showing how easily our sense of control can be manipulated.
Oh, yeah, like those experiments where they make people think they're controlling something, but it's actually pre-programmed.
The excerpt gave a cool example.
Yeah, which one?
Where people think they're ringing a bell with a button, but the timing's already set.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
They feel like they're making the bell ring, but it was going to happen anyway.
Exactly. It really highlights how easily we can be fooled.
It's kind of creepy, but also really fascinating.
Totally. It's like there's this whole hidden world of brain activity going on beneath the surface that we're not even aware of.
Like an iceberg, we only see the tip.
Perfect analogy. But before we throw out the idea of free will completely, the excerpt does bring up some counterarguments. Yeah, it's not all doom and gloom for free will.
It wouldn't be a good deep dive without looking at all sides, right?
Right. We need to explore different perspectives.
So who are these free will defenders?
They're called compatibilists.
Compatibilists, okay?
And they argue that free will is still alive and kicking, even with all this neuroscience stuff.
Interesting. How do they make that argument?
Well, one of their big points is that those Libet-style studies, they focus on really simple actions, like pushing a button.
Like those button-pushing experiments we talked about.
Exactly. And they say that those simple actions don't really capture the complexity of real-life choices.
So it's like comparing apples and oranges.
Kind of, yeah. Like saying, because you can predict when someone will push a button, you can predict all their choices.
Which obviously isn't true.
Right. Real life is way more complex than that.
And the excerpt mentions a study where they looked at brain activity when people made more important decisions.
Yeah, decisions that actually had consequences.
Like
donating to charity.
Okay, so a choice with more weight to it.
Exactly. And they found that the readiness potential wasn't as strong when the choice had a bigger impact.
Interesting. So maybe it's not as simple as our brains decide first.
Right. It might depend on the situation, the complexity of the choice.
Okay, so maybe there's more nuance to it than we initially thought.
For sure. It's not black and white.
And the compatibilists also bring up another point about how we define things like consciousness and decision-making.
Yeah, those aren't exactly easy terms to define.
Right, like what exactly does it mean to make a conscious decision?
Exactly. And the excerpt even admits that it struggles with coming up with clear definitions.
I noticed that too. The author brings up some really interesting philosophical points, but doesn't always fully explain them.
Which is frustrating, but also makes you think more, right?
Yeah, it definitely leaves you wanting more.
And that's why these debates about free will are still so fascinating. There's still so much to explore.
Totally. It's like we're just scratching the surface.
And within all of this, there's one concept that stood out to me, the idea of free won't.
Ooh, free won't. That sounds intriguing. What's that all about?
It's kind of like this, even if we don't have control over that initial impulse to do something.
Like those unconscious brain processes we were talking about.
Exactly. Maybe we can still veto that action before it actually happens.
So like hitting the brakes before things get out of control.
Exactly. It's like having the power to say no to our impulses.
So we might not control the initial urge, but we can still choose not to act on it.
Right. It's like that moment of hesitation before you reach for that extra cookie or before you say something you might regret.
We've all been there.
And the excerpt actually talks about studies on this vetoing process.
Really? What do they find?
Well, it seems like certain parts of our brains are involved in stopping actions.
So there's a whole neural system dedicated to putting the brakes on our impulses.
It seems that way.
That's amazing. It's like our brains have this built-in safety mechanism.
Exactly, a way to override those automatic processes.
So maybe we do have some control after all, even if it's not over the initial impulse.
It's like a two-stage process. Our brain proposes and our consciousness disposes.
I like that. It's like a dance between our unconscious and conscious minds.
And it's a dance that's happening all the time, shaping our actions and ultimately who we are.
This is mind-blowing stuff. I'm already rethinking my whole morning routine.
Right. It makes you wonder about all those little decisions we make throughout the day.
And how much control we actually have over them.
It's a question worth pondering.
For sure. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're just getting started with this deep dive.
We've got a lot more to unpack.
So buckle up, everyone. It's going to be a wild ride.
I can't wait.
It's like having two selves, the impulsive one and the one that tries to keep things in check.
Totally. It's a constant back and forth.
But this excerpt, it takes things even deeper. It asks, like, where did that initial intention come from? You know, the one that might happen before we're even aware of it.
Ugh. That's where we move beyond those milliseconds before an action and zoom out to the bigger picture.
Okay, I'm liking this zooming out. Tell me more.
It's about considering the entire lifespan of experiences that shape our intentions, like our biology.
Our genes and all that.
Right, and our environment, like where we grew up, who we're around.
Our upbringing. That makes sense.
All of it, and then all our past experiences, the good and the bad.
It's like you can't just look at the final action in isolation.
Exactly. It's like judging a book by its cover.
You have to read the whole story to really get it.
Exactly. You need the context.
And the excerpt uses a pretty intense example to illustrate this.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
It asks us to imagine pulling a trigger, killing someone.
Whoa. Okay, that got dark fast.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Heavy stuff, but it makes you think.
It definitely grabs your attention.
Like, if someone does pull that trigger, it's not just about the moment they decided to do it.
It's about everything that led up to that point, their whole life, essentially.
Their past, their experiences, what was going through their mind at that moment.
All of it. It's a complex web of influences.
And the excerpt asks, is it even ethical to ignore all that past stuff when we talk about intent and responsibility?
Ah, now we're getting to the heart of it.
Right. Like, can we really just focus on that split-second decision without considering the whole story?
The excerpt brings up this philosopher, Daniel Dennett.
Okay, haven't heard of him.
He argues that basically luck averages out in the long run.
So, like, even if you start off with some bad luck, things will even out eventually.
Yeah, he uses this analogy of a marathon.
Okay, I'm listening.
He's saying even if a runner starts behind, they have time to catch up.
Okay, I get the analogy.
But the excerpt, it doesn't agree with Dennett.
Oh, really? How so?
It argues that his view is way too simplistic. It ignores the real, lasting impact of disadvantage.
So, like, someone born into poverty, facing all those obstacles, they don't just magically disappear over time.
Exactly. It's not a level playing field.
It's like that marathon runner, but they keep tripping, or
Right.
they have to take these detours.
They might finish the race eventually, but it's a much harder journey.
Way harder.
And that's the ethical dilemma, right? If we only focus on the intent in the moment without taking into account all the stuff that shaped that intent.
We're not being fair to those who haven't had the same advantages.
Exactly. We're ignoring the reality of their experience.
It's like saying everyone has the same chance of winning a game, even if some players start with a huge head start.
It just doesn't make sense.
Nope, not at all.
So the excerpt seems to be saying, yeah, those Libet-style studies are interesting, but they don't tell the whole story about free will.
We can't ignore the past. It's a part of who we are.
And it shapes our choices in ways we might not even realize.
It's like those time travel movies, where changing one tiny event in the past has huge ripple effects in the future.
I love that analogy.
Our past experiences are like those tiny events, shaping who we are and the choices we make.
And that's why understanding those deeper origins of intent, it can lead to a more nuanced, compassionate view of responsibility.
Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more about that.
It's not about just labeling people good or bad, or just focusing on punishment.
It's about understanding what led them to that point.
Exactly. It's about recognizing all those complex factors that contribute to our actions.
So, like, instead of just punishing someone for a bad choice, maybe we also look at ways to create environments where people are more likely to make good choices.
Right. It's about prevention as much as it is about reaction.
It's like giving people the support and opportunities they need to thrive.
Exactly. Creating a world where everyone has a fair shot.
I like that. It's a much more hopeful way of looking at things.
And it's a way of thinking that takes into account all those factors we've been talking about. The brain, the environment, the past.
It's about seeing the whole person, not just the action.
Exactly. And that's where real understanding and change can begin.
Wow. I feel like we just went through a whole philosophy course crammed into one deep dive.
I know, right?
Right,
We covered so much ground.
From the nitty-gritty of neuroscience to those big philosophical debates about free will and even like the ethical side of how we judge people's actions.
Yeah, and what I think is so cool is how this excerpt ties it all together.
Yeah, it's not just a bunch of random ideas. It's all connected.
It starts with this really intense scene, to grab our attention.
Hooks us right in.
Then it dives into the science of the brain and decision-making.
And all those studies, Libet and the ones that came after.
Exactly, and it ends up making us question some really deep stuff about how we see ourselves and other people.
Yeah, we judge them. Yeah.
It's not just an intellectual exercise. This stuff has real implications for how we live our lives.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like how our legal system works, our social policies.
Even just how we interact with each other on a daily basis.
Exactly.
I think that's what makes this excerpt so powerful. It's not just theoretical.
It's about real life.
And I like that it doesn't give us all the answers.
Makes us do some of the work ourselves.
Right. It leaves us with more questions than answers. Yeah. Which is actually a good thing.
Keeps those brain juices flowing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It pushes us to think critically, to grapple with the complexity of human behavior.
And to be honest, there are no easy answers when it comes to free will and responsibility.
It's messy. Right.
Life is messy.
So maybe instead of trying to come up with some rigid definition of free will,
And using that to judge people.
we can shift our focus to something more practical.
Like what?
Like, how can we create environments that actually encourage people to make better choices?
Yeah, that's a good point. Focus on creating the conditions for positive change
Exactly.
instead of just reacting to bad choices after they've happened.
We can be more proactive.
Exactly.
And this idea really resonated with me. We often underestimate how much our environment influences our decisions.
It's huge.
Like you were saying earlier about how someone's past experiences, their upbringing, all that stuff, it shapes who they are and how they act.
It's part of their story.
Exactly. It's like that saying, you can't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
Oh, I like that one.
We need to create spaces where everyone can thrive, not just those who already have the skills and resources to navigate the system.
Yeah, give everyone a fair shot.
And I think understanding the origins of intent, like we've been talking about, that's crucial for creating those kinds of spaces.
Because when we realize that people's choices are influenced by a whole bunch of factors, including things they can't control.
We can start to approach things with more compassion.
More understanding, yeah.
It doesn't mean we excuse harmful behavior, but it does mean we look at it in a more nuanced way.
We see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that can lead to more constructive solutions.
Instead of just resorting to punishment.
We can look for ways to help people make better choices.
Support them. Give them opportunities.
And create systems that actually address the root causes of those harmful behaviors.
It's a much more holistic approach.
I love that word, holistic. It captures it perfectly.
It's about seeing the whole person, not just the action.
And that's what this whole deep dive has been about, right? Getting us to think about free will and responsibility in a more complex, more human way.
It's challenged my thinking, for sure.
Mine too, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners.
Me too. Get them thinking.
So, as always, we want to leave you with something to ponder.
Keep those conversations going.
What stood out to you the most in our exploration of free will and intent? How can we take these ideas and apply them to our own lives, our communities, our world?
And maybe the most important question, how can we move from just understanding to actually making a difference?
Those are the questions we'll leave you with today. Thanks for joining us on another deep dive. We'll see you